There is a photograph that sat in a museum for over 124 years. Thousands of people looked at it. Historians studied it. Curators preserved it with the greatest care, and not a single person noticed what was hiding in plain sight. Not until one morning in January 2023, when a researcher leaned toward her computer screen, pulled in a breath, and whispered, "Oh my God." What she saw in that image would rewrite a family's entire history and connect a 7-year-old girl alive today to an ancestor who crossed the ocean in chains hundreds of years ago. Stay with me because this story is going to take you somewhere you have never been before. If you are new here, welcome to Fear Sermon, the place where we find the stories history tried to bury. Hit that subscribe button right now and tap the like button, because today's story is one you are going to want to share with everyone you know. We post stories like this every week, and you do not want to miss a single one. Now let me take you back. Charleston, South Carolina, October 1899. Inside a small photography studio owned by a man named William Harrison, one of the very few photographers in the entire city who welcomed black clientele, a family was preparing for something special. They were getting their portrait taken, and they had dressed for the occasion. The studio smelled of developing chemicals and furniture polish. Heavy velvet curtains were pulled shut to block the afternoon sun, while gas lamps lit up a painted backdrop behind them. A backdrop showing a library full of leather-bound books. That was the dream Harrison sold to his clients, a picture of prosperity, a picture of dignity, and this family fit that dream perfectly. The father, Thomas, wore a perfectly tailored 3-piece suit of dark wool. A watch chain gleamed across his vest. He was a master carpenter, one of the most respected craftsmen in all of Charleston. His wife, Elizabeth, stood beside him in an elegant burgundy silk dress with black lace at the collar, her hair styled in the fashionable Gibson girl manner of the era. Their 5 children were arranged carefully around them, from the oldest at 23 years old down to the youngest, a 6-year-old boy named Samuel. Samuel was dressed in a small suit with short pants, white stockings, and polished shoes. His face had that particular look that children always have in old photographs, serious and solemn, with just a little bit of restlessness underneath. The look of a child trying very hard to stay still. The photographer, Harrison, positioned everyone just right. Thomas and Elizabeth in the center, children arranged by height, and little Samuel placed right up in the front where everyone could see him. His hands were at his sides. One hand rested lightly against his father's leg. Harrison said, "Now everyone hold very still. Look at the lens. Think of something that makes you proud." The family froze. The shutter opened. Light poured through the lens. Time stopped. And in that single moment, something extraordinary was captured on that film. Something no one would understand for more than a century. Thomas paid $3 for the portrait and came back 2 weeks later to collect the prints. The photograph hung in their parlor for years. Then it traveled through relocations and hardships across decades until it was eventually donated to the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. It was cataloged, it was admired, it was studied, but the secret it was keeping remained hidden. For 124 years, no one noticed. Dr. Rachel Foster had been working at the museum for 3 years when everything changed. Her job was methodical work, often repetitive, but deeply meaningful. She was scanning the museum's vast photograph collection, using a new piece of technology that could reveal details completely invisible to the naked eye. This scanner could capture images at 4,800 dots per inch, revealing fabric textures, paper grain, and even the individual silver crystals of old photographic film. It was designed to digitally preserve fragile photographs while pulling out every possible hidden detail. On a cold January morning in 2023, Rachel pulled a photograph from climate-controlled storage. The label read, "Thomas Family, Charleston, South Carolina, 1899, Studio Portrait, donated 1987. She had seen it before. Beautiful, striking in its dignity. The family's clothing, their posture, their direct and unwavering gaze all spoke of pride and achievement, exactly the kind of image the museum treasured. Evidence of black prosperity in an era when such stories were deliberately and systematically erased. Rachel placed the photograph on the scanner bed and started the scan. The image appeared line by line in stunning detail. First came the faces, then the clothing, then the painted backdrop behind them. Then the scan reached the bottom of the image where young Samuel stood in the front. And Rachel's hand froze. She leaned closer to the screen. She zoomed in once, then again, until the image resolved into perfect crystal clarity. She was looking at Samuel's right hand, the one resting against his father's leg, and what she saw made the breath leave her body. Samuel had 6 fingers on his right hand, not a smudge, not a blur, not a trick of the light. 6 distinct, fully formed fingers, clearly visible in the high-resolution scan. Rachel sat back in her chair. She zoomed to the left hand. 5 fingers, completely normal. She returned to the right hand. 6 fingers, unmistakable. The extra digit appeared beside the pinky finger, a condition known as postaxial polydactyly. And it was not some tiny nub or deformity. It looked proportional, it looked functional, it looked like it belonged exactly where it was. Rachel's heart was pounding as she searched the museum's database. Who was this family? Were there other photographs? Were there medical records? Within an hour, she had a name. Within 2 hours, she was on the phone. Dr. Webb, this is Dr. Rachel Foster from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I need you to come to Washington immediately. I think I found something extraordinary. Doctor. Marcus Webb arrived at the museum 48 hours later. He was a geneticist at Johns Hopkins University, specializing in hereditary conditions in African American populations. He came with white cotton gloves, a careful eye, and a deep respect for the painful history of how black bodies had been exploited in the name of medical research. Rachel met him in the examination room. The 1,899 photograph rested in an archival sleeve on a light table. When Marcus looked at it with his naked eye at normal viewing distance, the family looked exactly as expected. Dignified, proud, well-dressed. He could barely make out individual fingers at that distance. But then he looked at Rachel's digital scan, zoomed in on Samuel's right hand, and his eyes went wide. Postaxial polydactyly, he said quietly. The extra digit is beside the pinky finger, and look, it is not deformed at all. It appears fully formed with complete articulation. He removed his glasses. This is remarkable. Polydactyly occurs in about 1 in every 1,000 births, but to capture it this clearly in an 1,899 photograph, and for it to go completely unnoticed for over a century. Rachel leaned forward. There's more, she said, and she opened a folder. She told him what the donor records revealed. Thomas and his family were master carpenters in Charleston. Multiple generations of craftsmen, highly respected, deeply rooted in their community, and that detail sharpened Marcus's focus like nothing else could. Because multiple generations meant one thing in genetics, it meant inheritance. They began painstaking historical research together, the kind that takes months and tests your patience at every turn. The 1900 census gave them basic facts. Thomas, born around 1849, occupation listed as carpenter. Elizabeth, his wife. 5 children including Samuel, age 7. A property deed from 1897 showed Thomas had purchased a building on King Street. A significant achievement for a black man in that era. A clerk's note read, Thomas, master carpenter of considerable reputation. They were not struggling, Rachel observed. This was a successful family, Marcus nodded. Which makes me wonder, if this child had a 6th finger and the family was prosperous, they clearly did not hide it. They posed him right up front in a professional portrait. What does that tell us? Maybe they did not see it as shameful, or maybe they knew about it and considered it completely normal, because it ran in the family. Church records from Morris Street Baptist Church gave them their first real breakthrough. The church's meticulous record keeping showed births and baptisms for all 5 of Thomas's children. And in Samuel's baptismal record, written in careful, deliberate handwriting, was a note that made both of them go very still. Received into God's grace, marked with his distinction, blessed be his Maker's hands. Maker's hands. Marcus said the phrase out loud and let it sit in the air. Rachel searched further through digitized church records and found a newsletter from 1905 mentioning Thomas's carpentry business and its apprentices. It read, continuing the tradition of the Maker's hands passed from father to son. This was a family phrase. Something passed down, something specific to their hands, something they were proud of. The genealogical trail moved forward generation by generation. James, the eldest son, stayed in Charleston and continued the carpentry business. His son Robert appeared in city directories through the 1940s as a woodworker. Then the trail went cold. Robert disappeared from Charleston records after 1947, but Marcus searched the databases of Black Americans who had migrated north during the World Wars, and there he was. A 1948 Philadelphia directory, Robert Thomas Carpenter, South Street. From Philadelphia the trail continued forward. Robert's children, then grandchildren, some stayed in Pennsylvania, others scattered to Maryland, New Jersey, New York. Each generation represented hours of searching through incomplete records because for Black families in America, documentation was never guaranteed. Births went unregistered, records were lost, some were deliberately destroyed. 3 months into the research, Rachel found a post on a genealogy forum that made her hands shake. Someone named David Clark was researching his Charleston ancestors with the last name Thomas. He mentioned carpentry. He mentioned a family story about special hands. Rachel sent him a message immediately. The response came within an hour. Yes, when can we meet? I have been waiting my whole life to understand my family's story. Dr. David Clark drove to the museum on a Saturday morning in early April. He was 47 years old, an orthopedic surgeon at a Baltimore hospital, and he had been researching his Charleston roots for nearly 6 years. He sat down in the conference room and started talking about his grandfather, who used to tell him stories. Stories about Thomas the carpenter who built Charleston's finest furniture. Stories about hands that could do things other hands simply could not. Stories about a gift that traveled through blood. I thought they were just exaggerated family stories, David said. His voice slowed, but then my daughter was born. Rachel leaned forward. David, may I ask something personal? Do you have any unusual genetic characteristics? David held out his right hand, palm up. There, beside his pinky finger, was a 6th finger, fully formed. Naturally positioned, clearly functional, only my right hand, he said quietly. I was born with it. The doctors told my parents to have it surgically removed. They said it would make life easier, but my grandfather refused. He said, that hand is who we are. Do not you dare cut it away. What God and blood gave him. Marcus stared. Do other family members have this trait? My grandfather had it, same hand, same finger. He was a carpenter, like his father and grandfather before him. He used to joke that the extra finger made him better at his craft. David's voice thickened with emotion. My daughter has it too. She's 7 years old. When she was born and I saw that 6th finger, I understood. It is not a defect. It is who we are. Rachel slid the 1,899 photograph across the table toward David. We believe this is your great-great-grandfather, Thomas, and this, she said, pointing to the small boy in the front. We believe this is your great-grandfather, Samuel. David picked up the photograph with trembling hands. He looked at the formal poses, the fine clothing, the quiet pride in every face. Then he looked at Samuel. Knowing what to look for now, he could just barely make out the subtle difference in that small right hand. I have never seen his face, David whispered. My grandfather described him, but no photographs survived. He looked up with tears shining in his eyes. How did you find this? Rachel explained the scanning technology. Marcus explained the genetic implications. And then Marcus said carefully, "We would like to conduct genetic testing with your full permission. If we can map this mutation and trace it through your family, we may be documenting one of the longest hereditary genetic traits in American history." David did not hesitate for even a second. "My daughter is proud of her hand. She calls it her special finger. She will want to be part of this." The testing took 6 weeks. Marcus collected blood samples from David, 3 cousins who agreed to participate, and from David's daughter Emma, with her father's careful consent. The results arrived on a Tuesday morning, and Marcus called both Rachel and David immediately. When they gathered around his desk at Johns Hopkins, Marcus pulled up the genetic sequencing data on his monitor, and his voice was tight with something that sounded like controlled amazement. "I have confirmed it," he said. "The polydactyly in your family is caused by a specific mutation in the GLI3 gene, which regulates limb development during fetal formation. This particular variant is exceptionally rare. I searched global genetic databases. There are fewer than 20 documented cases worldwide with this exact mutation." He pulled up a family tree on the screen with red markers on each confirmed generation. "Based on the genealogical records and the genetic testing, we can now trace this trait back at least 6 confirmed generations, from your daughter Emma, born in 2016, all the way back to Samuel in the 1890s, and based on family oral history and those church records about makers' hands being passed from father to son, the trait likely extends even further back, possibly 8 to 10 generations total." Rachel spoke quietly into the silence. "That would place the origin sometime in the early to mid-1800s, possibly within the enslaved population." Marcus nodded. "The GLI3 mutation almost certainly originated in West Africa. When your ancestor was enslaved and brought to America, he carried that gene with him. Because polydactyly is a dominant trait, it had a high probability of being passed to each generation." David sat back and absorbed all of it. "My grandfather always said the gift came from Africa, from ancestors who were makers and builders." "He was right," Marcus said. With genetic confirmation in hand, Rachel and Marcus intensified their historical research, determined to trace the trait back as far as possible. They returned to Charleston, visiting historical societies, church archives, and elderly community members whose families had lived in the city for generations. And they found a 91-year-old archivist named Mr. James Washington at his small lowcountry museum, who said something that stopped everyone cold. "Six-Finger Thomas," Mr. Washington said when Marcus mentioned the name. "My grandfather used to tell stories, said Thomas was the finest craftsman he had ever seen, could shape wood like it was clay." He pulled out a worn leather journal, his grandfather's notes from the 1920s, written after Thomas had passed away in 1923. "Marcus, read the words aloud." "Thomas died yesterday, aged 75, the finest carpenter Charleston ever knew. His son James carries on the work, and James's boy too, both with their grandfather's blessed hands. They say the gift goes back to Thomas's father and his father before him, back to the old country before the chains, back to Africa." The trait had predated enslavement. Mr. Washington nodded slowly. "That's what people believed, something Thomas's ancestors brought with them across the water, something the slavers could not take away." Armed with this, Marcus contacted researchers specializing in African genetic populations. Through comparative databases and historical migration patterns, they identified a possible origin region in West Africa, specifically parts of modern-day Nigeria and Cameroon, where certain woodworking and metalworking guilds had been documented by colonial researchers in the late 1800s. One obscure text from 1887, written by a British colonial officer, described visiting a master carver's workshop. The craftsman had 6 digits on each hand. He claimed the trait had run in his family line for generations, passed from master to apprentice within their bloodline. He believed it was the source of his extraordinary skill. Marcus showed this to David at their next meeting. "I cannot prove definitively that this craftsman was your ancestor," he said honestly. The historical record does not allow that level of specificity, but the geographic region, the time period, the craft tradition, and the hereditary nature of the trait all align. David traced the words on the page with his finger, his six-fingered hand moving slowly across the text. My grandfather said we were makers, that it was in our blood, passed down through generations who refused to forget who they were, even in chains. Marcus, Rachel, and David published their findings in a joint academic paper titled Hereditary Polydactyly as Cultural and Genetic Legacy, a Multigenerational African-American Lineage. The journal fast-tracked peer review. Geneticists, historians, and anthropologists reached out from around the world, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture mounted a full special exhibition called Hands of Legacy, the Thomas family story. The exhibition featured the 1,899 photograph as its centerpiece, displayed with interactive screens that let visitors zoom in on Samuel's six-fingered hand and read the entire story. Genealogical charts traced 10 generations, genetic diagrams explained the GLI3 mutation, contemporary photographs of David and Emma stood beside replicas of Thomas's carpentry tools, and David's own surgical instruments were displayed right alongside them, the visual parallel striking and undeniable. The same hands, separated by more than a century, both using their 12 fingers to create, to build, to heal. Thousands visited in the first month. The Washington Post covered it, NPR covered it, the New York Times. International media. The photograph that had sat forgotten for 124 years was now circling the globe. And then something happened that nobody had quite expected. David started receiving messages, dozens at first, then hundreds. Parents of children born with extra digits wrote to say they had decided against surgical removal after reading about his family. Adults who had spent their entire lives hiding their hands sent photographs of themselves for the very first time, their faces next to their unique anatomy, visible and proud. One message in particular moved David more than any other. It came from a woman in Nigeria. My son has hands like yours, she wrote. In our village, we have stories of ancestors with these hands, craftsmen and healers. Reading your family's story helped me understand this is not a curse. It is a gift that travels through blood. David read that message aloud to Marcus and Rachel at the exhibition's opening night, his voice barely holding steady. For so long I thought this was just about my family, he said. But it is bigger than that. It is about how difference can be strength. How something the medical world sees as an abnormality can be a source of identity, skill, and pride. 6 months after the exhibition opened, David sat with his daughter Emma in front of the 1,899 photograph. Emma was 7 years old enough now to truly understand what she was looking at. That is Samuel, David said, pointing to the small figure in the front of the portrait. He is your great-great-great-grandfather. He had hands just like yours. Emma studied the photograph carefully. Then she looked down at her own right hand and flexed all 6 fingers. Did people make fun of him? David knelt beside her. We do not know for sure, but we know his family was proud of him. They dressed him in their very best clothes and took him to an expensive photography studio. They put him right up front where everyone could see him. They did not hide him. Emma looked at him like you and Mom did not hide me. Exactly like that. Emma looked back at the photograph. Tell me again about the maker's hands, David smiled. Your great-great-great-great-grandfather Thomas was a carpenter. He built things from wood. His father was also a carpenter, and his father before him. They had hands like ours, with the extra finger, and people said it made them the finest craftsmen in all of Charleston. They called it maker's hands because they could make things other people simply could not. And you are a doctor. Emma said, you fix people's hands. I do. And my extra finger helps me perform surgeries that other doctors find very difficult. It gives me better control, better precision. Emma flexed her fingers again, watching them move in the light. When I grow up, what will I make with my maker's hands? David felt his throat tighten. Whatever you want, sweetheart. Whatever you dream. They stood together in silence in front of that photograph. 3 centuries of genetic inheritance connecting them to the small boy, frozen in time. Samuel, dressed in his finest clothes on an October afternoon in 1899, his right hand resting against his father's leg, his 6 fingers captured in silver crystals on a glass plate, waiting 124 years to finally be seen. That evening, Emma asked if she could write a letter to Samuel. David helped her. "Dear great-great-great-grandfather Samuel," she wrote, "my name is Emma. I am 7 years old. I have hands like yours, 6 fingers on my right hand. My daddy says you are proud of your hands and your family was proud of you. I am proud too. I am proud of my hand and I am proud that we are family. Thank you for not hiding. Thank you for being in the picture so we could find you. Love, Emma." David framed that letter and placed it on his desk beside a photo of Emma, 2 children separated by 124 years, connected by 6 fingers and an unbroken line of blood, both photographed, both visible, both proud. 1 year after the exhibition opened, David took Emma to Charleston for the first time since his own childhood. He wanted her to walk the streets her ancestors had walked, to touch the wood they might have shaped. They found the building where Thomas's carpentry shop had stood on King Street. It was a restaurant now, completely renovated, but the bones of the structure were still there. High ceilings, wide door frames, thick support beams that spoke of 19th century craftsmanship. The owner, when he heard why they had come, let them explore. In the basement, beneath layers of modern renovation, the original wood beams were still visible. David ran his hand across the surface, feeling the marks of hand tools, the precision of joints fitted without a single nail or screw. "Your great-great-great-great-grandfather made this," he told Emma, "with hands like ours." They visited Morris Street Baptist Church, where the current pastor welcomed them warmly and pulled out the original baptismal records so Emma could see her ancestor's name written in careful script, with the note about Maker's hands still visible beside it after all those years. At a local exhibition space, families came who were descendants of the black craftsmen and tradespeople who had built Charleston's prosperity while being denied its full benefits. They shared their own family stories, their own inherited traits, their own histories of survival. An elderly woman approached David and Emma near the end of the day. "My great-grandfather knew Thomas," she said softly. "Used to tell stories about him, said he was a quiet man but his work spoke loud, said you could always tell furniture Thomas made because the joints were so tight and the finish so smooth, said Thomas had special hands." Emma held up her right hand. "I have them too." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She took Emma's small hand gently in both of hers. "Blessed child, you carry him with you." That evening, sitting on a hotel balcony overlooking Charleston Harbor, David told Emma about the Middle Passage, about the enslaved Africans who had been brought across that water in chains, about how her ancestor, perhaps Samuel's great-great-great-grandfather, had survived that crossing with nothing but his body, his memory, and the genes that would travel forward through generation after generation. They took everything from him, David said quietly. His freedom, his home, his name, his language, but they could not take what was inside his blood, and that traveled forward through all those generations, all the way to you. Emma looked at her hand in the dimming light over the harbor. "The gift that travels through blood," she said. "Yes, and I will pass it to my children. Maybe, if you have children and if they inherit it, the trait is dominant, so there is a good chance." Emma smiled. "I hope they do. I hope they have Maker's hands too." 6 months after the Charleston trip, the academic paper won the Journal of Medical Genetics Award for excellence in historical genetics research. David, Rachel, and Marcus accepted it together in Baltimore. In his acceptance speech, David did not talk about science. He talked about identity. He talked about survival for 124 years. He said, "My great-great-grandfather Samuel stood in that photograph with his 6-fingered hand visible but unseen. The technology to see him did not exist yet. The framework to understand him did not exist yet, but he was always there, waiting, because his family was proud enough to photograph him, because archivists were careful enough to preserve that photograph, because researchers were curious enough to look closely, we finally saw him, and in seeing him we saw ourselves. That is the power of not hiding. That is the legacy my family gave me, and the legacy I give my daughter. Be visible, be proud, be exactly who you are, because someone in the future might need to see you to understand themselves. The photograph of Samuel and his family now resides permanently in the main hall of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, displayed with interactive screens that let visitors zoom all the way in on that small right hand and read every word of this story. It has become one of the most visited exhibits in the entire museum. And sometimes, late at night, David pulls up that high-resolution scan on his computer. He zooms in on Samuel's 6-fingered hand. He sits there quietly, feeling the weight of connection across time, the same mutation, the same chromosomes, the same 12 fingers, linking him to a child who stood solemn and proud in a Charleston photography studio in 1899, not knowing that his hand would one day speak across more than a century. Samuel could not have known any of it. He simply stood there that October afternoon, dressed in his finest clothes, being exactly who he was. But his hand spoke across the years, and finally someone had listened. If this story moved you the way it moved me, please drop a comment below and tell me what part hit you the hardest. Was it Emma's letter to Samuel? Was it the maker's hands passed down through generations? Was it the idea that something meant to be erased survived anyway, carried in the blood? I want to read every single one of your thoughts, and if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this today, please share this video with them right now. It only takes a second, and it means everything. This is Fear Sermon, where no story stays buried. We will see you in the next one.